Best threatened to kill him, Bob decided to get out.
He reached into his vest pocket and said, "Now, if you ever talk to anyone about this," and he pulled out his hand in the shape of a gun, aimed it directly at my head, and then pulled the pretend trigger of the gun.
Bob fled to Orlando to start over. But months later, familiar names began to surface in the news, connected to something called Iran scam.
All of the same characters, or at least some of the characters that they were dealing with, were the characters that were in my company.
Once again, Bob decided to tell his story. The Iran-Contra committee sent 2 investigators to listen, but Bob says they did nothing.
And at the finish of the interview, it was sort of like, well, thanks a lot. You did a good job. Thanks for talking to us. Now you can forget about it.
They very much wanted to have the show quickly without all the tedious work of the investigation.
One of the investigators was Tom Polgar, an ex-CIA agent who lives in Maitland. Polgar claims the investigation was rushed. Congress wanted it on TV in a hurry and limited it to only diversion of Iranian arms sale profits to Contras. Bob's story didn't deal with that.
And we didn't find that their allegations were relevant to our inquiries.
Bob calls that a whitewash and was angry when he learned Polgar was in Vietnam with many of those he was investigating.
It's like having Charles Manson investigated by one of his followers.
And as he learned more about the Iran-Contra scandal, information fell together like pieces of a puzzle. For instance, Bob realized the day Best made his panicked trip to Washington was the day mercenary Eugene Hassenfuss was shot down over Nicaragua. But the clincher was this, a page from Oliver North's notebooks showing the flow of money and weapons through front companies. One company caught Bob's attention, Toyco.
I don't know, I'm just positive that it was a spin-off, Hey Toys. That was a real joke, I think, that they were using my toy company as a front.
Tomorrow, Bob Fletcher's part in a nationwide lawsuit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. John McPherson, News Center 2. In this small office building in suburban Atlanta, Bob Fletcher's toy company was ruined by men who bled it dry.
I just had 5 years of my life blown right down the tubes.
But Bob's is not the typical story of a small businessman gone bust. The men who ruined his company were arms smugglers, most of them former U.S. military and intelligence officers. Bob fled to his native Florida after they threatened to kill him. But when Bob watched the Iran-Contra scandal unfold on television, he watched men who'd frequented his office testify to Congress, especially this man, retired Army General John Singlaub, who admits being part of the Contra resupply effort.
Bob Fletcher just got burned.
Rick Ryan is an attorney for the Christic Institute, a national legal foundation. The Institute filed suit against those behind the Iran-Contra affair. The suit charges men like Singlaub broke the law for years, illegally funding anti-communist activities around the globe. The Christic Institute uncovered evidence of gun running, drug smuggling, embezzlement, murder, and the repeated ruination of innocent people like Bob Fletcher.
Bob Fletcher has probably the most innocuous business you can possibly imagine, a puppet company selling toys at an amusement park. And yet, if you think about it, if you're a covert operative and you want to front, can you imagine a better operation than that?
The Christic Institute suit was thrown out of court this month, though the Institute is appealing, and there is talk of throwing out criminal charges against Oliver North. Vista is closed, Bob's company is gone. And Bob wonders, maybe some can break the law and get away with it, even be called heroes. Yet he refuses to give up.
I absolutely feel it as a personal obligation. I mean, it's just, I brought my children up under the idea that if you see a crime taking place, or you see something that's wrong, report it.
I think that's very impressive. I think that requires a lot of moral fiber, and that is my definition of a hero, someone who can do that, who can stand all by himself, as Bob Fletcher did for a long time, and say, but I'm not going to stop talking about this until I see the justice has been done.
John McPherson, News Center 2.
Well, I guess that sort of speaks for itself. Dan, I have to point out that little three-part segment that you saw was done in about 1988. I have to mention a short time after that was done, and I had been a deposed witness in the Christic Institute's legal action, which was a $24 million action against these same characters that showed up in the Iran-Contra business. It named Richard Secord and et cetera, which I'll show you some of his testimony also before the Senate and the Congress, where he jokingly said, you know, of course we were making money and that was the name of the game. The interconnection between Gary Best, the fellow that you saw in my toy factory in those clips, with Richard Secord, General Heine Adderholt, General Singlaub, John Singlaub, at that time, was completely an interfaced action. As a matter of fact, the later on, now, and in recent times, in the later 1990s, and starting in 92, 94, 95, Gary Best, Richard Secord, and General Heine Adderholt have been in Azerbaijan, the Russias, putting together mercenary troops, training mercenary terrorist-type groups, and supplying military weapons in that area. It would not surprise me if the illegal weapons that surfaced briefly in Bill Clinton's administration, where they came forward and said it appeared that we had been shipping some illegal weapons, they probably absolutely were done by these same characters. So the interfacing there between these same people will show, you will see here as we move forward, it's profuse and it's continuous. Now, I was surprised at the very beginning, obviously, of my situation with the toy company to find out that, in fact, these guys were just flagrantly talking about what they were doing. And I became privy to several operations. And after I left the toy factory, I heard from a very good potential, a fellow who had been involved as an agent. He told me that some of the toys from the toy factory had been flown down to Guatemala and then restuffed with some funny little white powder and shipped back up again. Now these toys, which when I heard the story, I was sure that he was probably accurate because the toys were only he or I would have known, or somebody, myself was the only one that would have known what the toys were like, and he described them to me and they were accurate. So I'm assuming that that story was accurate. And down in Guatemala they had set up what was called safe villages, model villages they call them. They were set up with cooperation of the Guatemalan government. The bottom line is they were in fact producing, there was two sides of it. One was mind control and the other side was drugs being processed there and then being shipped up. So that was one small part of the drug relationship to our government. Now, the Pakistan source for government, with President Zia, who was later murdered with a whole handful of other people having his plane blown up, Pakistan connection was also profuse. And yet George Bush, on a continuing basis, was supplying Pakistan and those related governments with huge amounts of financial assistance on a regular basis. Never once did they ever look at the possibility of some of the drug connections there. And you will see that, as a matter of fact, during the period of time that George Bush was the drug czar, we were amazed to realize when we went back over the figures that the problem of drugs on the streets in the United States had increased 1,000%. Now, an interesting thing happens, and that is that when people come forward that have been previously agents, for example, and they, for one reason or another, decide to blow the whistle on some particular a drug operation or something that was assassin or something like that, the government, the powers to be it the CIA, National Security Agency, or whomever is involved, or the executive branch, immediately will come out and say, well, we don't even know who this guy was. This fellow worked for 6 months